When my girlfriend was 17 and I was 18, she lived out in the country with her parents, and when it snowed badly, she would have to park about a quarter mile away in her grandfather's driveway as her two-wheel drive Pontiac couldn't make it through the hill on her own driveway. But one night in early February, after a particularly nasty snowstorm, she was driving home and noticed an odd light in the sky. She didn't think much of it and kept on driving, and eventually she arrived at her grandfather's. And this is when it got really weird. So I looked down at my phone and I see that I've missed about 7 consecutive calls from her. I call her back and she answered immediately in a state of panic. She was talking about how she saw a light in the sky, and even though she was now parked and her keys were out of the ignition, her dash lights and headlights and radio were going totally haywire, and over the radio was nothing but white noise. I could hear the radio over the phone too. I, of course, told her that it was nothing to be worried about, probably just a battery issue, when she just got really quiet. And then she said that she saw a figure at the end of the driveway, and I again wrote it off and said it's probably just the mailbox. And that was when she screamed. The figure had moved seemingly in the blink of an eye from the end of a 60-foot or so long driveway to about 30 feet away. She screamed again when she noticed now that it was slowly moving towards the driver door. It got about 10 feet away from the driver's door, and then there was a flash of light and it just vanished. I asked her to describe the figure, and she said that it was roughly 7 feet tall, skinnier than any human should be, with long arms that hung down to its knees. She described the head as being almond-shaped and was for some reason adamant that it was almond and not elliptical. She got out of her car and made a break for her house, running through snow and ice while on the phone with me, and she screams again. She eventually made it to her house and ran to her room, and she said that when she was running, there was a massive flash of light behind her, and there was a searing pain in her calf. Obviously very freaked out, we spoke on the phone for a while, and eventually she calmed down and she went to bed. The next day I messaged her in the morning and said something along the lines of, "LOL, so did you make it through the night without being abducted?" And she responded with something along the lines of, "Yeah, ? What do you mean?" And I told her what happened. And she didn't believe me at all. She had and still has no recollection of the night's events. Every record, phone calls and texts of our conversations the night before were gone from her phone, and she only believed me when I screenshotted our conversation on my phone from after she hung up and sent it to her, and showed her all of the phone call records still on my phone. I remember what she told me about the burning sensation in her calf and told her to check it, and lo and behold, there's a really nasty red mark on it. So, what do you guys think? Could this have been some sort of alien experience? And if it wasn't, what the heck else could it have been? My family has a small acreage in the Canadian prairies, and it's not too far out from the city, but far enough that it was very rare to have unexpected visitors. At the time, we had some sheep and some chickens, but it wasn't a huge farm by any means. It was just my mum, my dad, my sister and I, and my sister was 5 years older than me, so I was only about 7 at the time. We also had a sweet dog named Maggie. My parents have always said that she was the best farm dog that we ever had. She was some sort of a cross with shaggy black hair and was really sweet with the animals and kids. She also never barked or got upset without a very good reason, much unlike our last pup who, bless her soul, would bark at the wind. Anyway, my dad was out of town this particular night, probably visiting my grandpa in his town down south. My mum was alone with us little guys, and Maggie was sleeping soundly on the porch. Now, my mum woke up in the middle of the night to Maggie growling. My mum's a pretty light sleeper, so it doesn't take much to wake her up, but this was a very unusual behavior for our pup. My mum thought that it was probably just an animal, so she took a peek outside. Sometimes coyotes or large bucks would just upset Maggie, so that was the most likely explanation. However, this wasn't the case that night. Our farm is right adjacent to the highway, and there's a long, unlit lane that leads into our yard. It wasn't obvious at first, but my mum saw a dark vehicle slowly creeping down the lane. The car's headlights were shut off, and we didn't have a lot of light in the yard, so it was pretty hard to see. But my mum's stomach immediately sunk. Anyone with good intentions wouldn't shut off their headlights like this. She also had 2 little kids in the house that she had to protect. So she watched them slowly creep into the yard, and I don't know how many there were, but at least a couple of guys got out of the vehicle and headed towards the shop where my dad keeps his tools. At the time, there was a big power panel on that side that controlled all of the electricity to the yard lights in the house too. They opened it up and started to go through it, evidently trying to figure out how to shut off the power. But God knows what their true intentions were, but luckily, my family has a hunting rifle, and my mum grew up on a farm, so she knows her way around a gun. So, rifle in hand, she quietly propped open the door just enough to stick the barrel out. She fired a few warning shots in the guy's direction, and they freaked out and hopped back into their vehicle, reversing all the way down the lane so that she couldn't see their license plate. To this day, we obviously have no idea what these guys' plans were, but maybe it was just to rob us, but the idea of people pulling into the yard with no headlights and shutting off the power, it's definitely unsettling, and a lot more could have happened, for sure. Either way, I'm extremely grateful for our sweet Maggie and my badass mum for keeping us safe. It's been 21 years since this happened, but I sure hope that we never see those guys again. So first, let me just say that this happened almost 20 years ago now, so I'm a little bit foggy on a few details. So, I was 15 years old and I was really into punk rock. I had a pink mohawk and wore Doc Marten boots, and my clothes were adorned with patches with band logos on them. I'm telling you this because my mum always chastised me for looking a bit like a prostitute, and honestly, maybe I did. Anyway, I was walking home the city's main street from my boyfriend's house about 2 miles away from home when a car pulls up beside me and the driver asked me for directions to get to the second street. The numbered streets are way downtown, so I figured this bozo was just totally lost. Naive me goes up to the passenger window and I see he has a map out on his lap. This guy honestly looked like every suburban dad that I'd ever seen, and there was even a car seat in the back, so I figured that he was harmless. I told him something like, "Oh, you must be really lost if you think 2nd Street is around here. Let me see the map. I'll show you where you need to go." And as soon as I reached in the window, 2 things happened. The map slides off his lap and I can see that his junk is out. And he grabs me by my arm and tries to pull me in through the window. I was in so much shock that I didn't even think I screamed. I just remember that he was pulling me in by my left arm, so I started punching him in the neck and the chest with my right. He only got me into the car up to my waist before he let go of me, and I was able to scramble out of the window. All of this happened so fast that I can't remember if he said anything, or if I did, or really if anything else happened. After that, though, I ran as fast as I could away from the car and toward my house, and he actually tried to follow me in the car for a while. I crossed the street where there were some boys riding their bikes on some dirt ramps by the freeway, and I didn't start to cry until I saw them, and I just burst into tears and begged one of them to walk me home so that I wouldn't be alone for this creep to snatch me up again. The kid on the bike was probably the same age as me, but he was my hero as far as I was concerned because he walked me all the way back to my block, and the guy in the car eventually gave up. I have had the misfortune of coming across a few scary guys in my life. My friends will say that I'm a weirdo magnet, so I'm pretty wary and clued up now that I'm a bit older. But when I was a teenager, I suppose you could say that I was very naive. Back when I was 20, me and my family, my mum and my little sister, had moved from a small rural village in the Shires to a town down south. It was a huge change, and as I'd been having a difficult time, I welcomed the change of scenery. It was a beautiful town in an affluent part of the country, but I struggled to find a job and became very frustrated as my mum needed a bit of help with money. Over the course of about 3 months, we became fairly friendly with a middle-aged guy who owned a takeaway shop in town. His name was Phil. If he ever saw us doing some shopping, he would come and chat and ask how the family were, and he genuinely seemed like a decent, caring bloke. So when he said that he might have a job for me in his shop with a small flat upstairs that I could rent for next to nothing, I thought, okay, great, maybe things are looking up. Phil got our address and told me and my mum that he'd pop by early evening time when he had finished and take me in the car to go and see the flat. I get myself looking fairly casual but presentable, and I'm feeling excited and confident, thinking, wow, a job and a flat. I've killed 2 birds with 1 stone. I just need to show him that I'm sophisticated and would make a great employee. Around 8 p.m, he knocks on the front door and Mum answers, and he tells her that we'll probably only be about half an hour and he'll have me back safe and sound in no time. Now, I didn't take my phone with me as I didn't have any credit to call out and didn't think I'd be needing it for a quick trip up the road and back. But in hindsight, it was a pretty stupid thing to do. Maybe if I'd had my phone on me, it would have deterred him from what he was about to do. So, it's already dark out as it's March, and I get in his car and we start driving, and he's chatting away, asking how I am and telling me how the flat is like, when, within a matter of a few minutes, I've noticed that we're not taking the conventional route that takes us directly into town. At first, I think that he's just taking me down some sort of shortcut round the town to get to it and just reason with myself that he knows the area well and I don't. 30 seconds after, I realize that he's taking me in the completely opposite direction, and I can tell that we're driving away from the populated town and into an area where trees swamp both sides of the road. My brain is now working overtime thinking, where the heck is this guy taking me? And I just about managed to keep my composure, and I ask him outright, where are we going? Town's back the other way. He says, I just thought I would take you on a little tour. It's beautiful here with many forests and peaceful places, and I'd love to show you them. He tells me this in a normal cheery tone. I wasn't capable of saying anything at that moment because the logical and reasoning side of my brain were in full-blown war. I'm trying to keep calm, thinking, okay, he seems fairly normal, but why wouldn't he want to show me around? It's a stunning area full of natural beauty, and he's probably proud to show me where he lives. The logical side, however, disagreed, and just a wave of panic comes over me, and a little voice enters my head and shouts, "What in the dark? Hell no. Are you stupid?" So I just kind of sit there in silence, taking in the scenery, which is becoming just more and more sinister by the second, because at that moment in time, I didn't know what to think. All I know is that every cell in my body is screaming at me to find a way out of this situation. I started looking for signposts, houses, any distinctive landmarks, ditches, huge trees, anything that I'd be able to use to recognize my way back if I had to bolt from this car. Phil can obviously sense that I'm nervous, so he's just talking away at me about what the job's like and how his staff are friendly, and before I know it, he's slowed down to a crawl and has turned down a little muddy rut road with a dense tree line on one side and pitch black open fields on the other. And it was at this point that my stomach literally drops and my body contemplates power vomiting all over his car because the reality of what is about to potentially happen hits me like a freight train. I'm thinking to myself, if I jump out of here, I have to be able to run over muddy fields into literally nowhere, but my imagination starts rather helpfully flashing by images of him grabbing me before I get a chance to get out of the door. So I just sit there buckled in the passenger seat, not saying a word. I'm just thinking to myself that if he attacks me, don't make a sound, don't give him the satisfaction of showing him that I'm scared. To be completely honest, my brain was about as useful as a chocolate teapot, and I was starting to get angry with myself for not doing something, but I was just completely terrified. So, we come out at the top of this little dirt road and there's a tiny little car park surrounded by woodland with one car sat in it. It was clear, and there were people in there having sex, and as he pulls near the car, I realise that he's brought me to a local dogging spot. He turns to me and puts his hand on my knee and says we should do what they're doing, with a deadly serious expression on his face. I make this bizarre kind of half-nervous laugh and half-garbled high-pitched whine and try to laugh off the suggestion to show that I'm not into it and I'm super uncomfortable right now. The alarmed expression on his face at my gurgled cackle, which sounds like I've swallowed a potato whole, clearly freaks him out, and I'm mentally congratulating myself for my social awkward and grossly unsexy reaction. He persists, though, and says that it'll be fun, no one will see us. I say, no, I don't want to, plus I'm kind of seeing someone right now. I lied, but he just kind of sits there, smiling at me like a Cheshire cat, like I'm going to miraculously change my mind at the sight of his weird face or something. I tell him after an insanely uncomfortable 30 seconds that Mum will be expecting me home now, and more of this as I try my damn hardest not to make eye contact. He tells me that I'm sure she won't mind you being a little bit longer with me, you can trust me, you know, with a straight face as we just sit next to the sex wagon parked next to us. I sharply pull my leg away from his grip and I tell him again, Mum is waiting for me, she'll start panicking if I'm not home soon or within the next few minutes. Take me home. I look him straight in the face and he knows that I'm not messing around. And without another word, he says, okay, that's fine, I'll take you back now, and drives me out of that creepy, seedy place and back home. My finger is hovering over the seatbelt button ready to jump out, mind you, and as we pull up outside of our home, I breathe a sigh of relief as I can see my safety literally a few feet away, and before he can stop me, I'm out and I slam the door behind me. As I'm stepping over a tiny little rope fence around our garden, he gets out of his car and my heart instantly sinks. He tells me, I think I'll pop in and see your mum quickly, and I swear that I could see a smirk on his face, but I know he's only doing this because he's freaking out, knowing damn well that I'm about to tell her. He was trying to delay the inevitable or scare me into keeping my mouth shut or something. Before I can try and talk him out of it, Mum has heard us pull up and open the front door. I barge past her with just one thought on my mind. I head straight into the kitchen and grab a small knife out of the drawer and I fly into my little sister's room like a mad woman. I say to her, don't you dare leave this room no matter what you hear. And seeing the knife that I'm stuffing up my sleeve, she just looks at me with panic in her eyes and whispers, okay. I walk back into the living room and this guy is sitting on one of the sofas, sprawled out, comfortable as anything, like he's at home or something. And at this point, I see red like the Hulk, and I'm ready for this guy, and I awkwardly perch myself on the arm of the sofa Mum is sitting on, the absolute furthest part away from him that I can manage, and he just sits there making small talk with my mum about how she's finding the area and are the neighbours friendly, all the while keeping his beady little weasel eyes on my every move. He then pats the sofa cushion next to him and says, why don't you come over here and sit next to me? And I tell him, no, I'm alright here thanks, as I'm fidgeting with my sleeve trying to stop the little knife from falling out in front of me. He laughs and pats the seat next to him again and says, why are you sat over there? Come here, honestly I won't bite. I say to him, no, I'm quite comfortable here, thank you very much, this time through gritted teeth. My mum, bless her, is looking at each of us during this back and forth like a tennis match, and I can see something is registering in her eyes, and she can see my behaviour is just all off. I've got one bum cheek weirdly pitched on the sofa arm, so I'm half stood up, half kind of sat down, and I'm fiddling about with my sleeve. I'm twitchy as hell and staring my mum in the face intensely, mentally trying to speak to her through the power of telepathy alone. I honestly must have looked like just a complete nutter. She finally speaks though and says, it's getting late now, so I think you should go. Mum is starting to look anxious now as she had finally twigged that something had happened. Phil gets up and agrees and mumbles something about having to check something at his shop. And when he walks by me and is nearly out of the room, he pauses and turns to me and puts his hand out to shake mine. I'm thinking to myself, what a weird thing this is to do, and I take the opportunity to kindly offer him my hand that had the knife. Taking it with a bit more force than is polite, he soon yanked his grubby mitt out of mine when the tip of the blade had jabbed him. He looked down and saw the blade and then looked at me, and I looked at him with just so much disgust. And at this point, Phil just hightailed it out of our home without another word. I told my mum everything, and she was honestly fuming. We did discuss going to the police, but there wasn't really a crime committed on his part, aside from just being a major creep. Sadly, when I mentioned to a couple of girls my age who lived down our street, they just clammed up and shot each other a strange look. I could only guess that he'd probably done this type of thing before. We moved away from the area after that, and to be honest, I'm glad to report that I've never seen his smug face ever again.